Welcome to Finding Words in Hard Times, the podcast, where we provide stories and tools to help you be more comfortable as you help others in hard times. I'm John Swanson, teacher, writer, and hospital chaplain. And today I'm talking to Rob Hatch. Rob's a two-time best-selling author and a sought-after coach for business owners and executives. Brings a unique blend of knowledge and background in the field of human development from his experience as a successful business leader and coach. He's written a weekly newsletter for over a decade, which is read by tens of thousands of individuals all over the world. Rob Hatch and Megan and their family are also friends of Nancy and me. We first met face-to-face in 2008. I was just looking at those pictures to verify the date,
Wow.
May like 20 something. And we've been in each other's houses, though we've been in their house more than they have been in our house. And I am so grateful to talk with you here at the beginning of this project, as somebody who knows something and as somebody who's a good friend. So welcome.
Thank you, friend. I like the part of the bio that just focused on the friends more than anything. And Dig noted, by the way, thank you for. I'll let Megan know that we've been prodded once again to make a trip to you, which is valid.
Well, it is, yeah, but whatever. You can, I'm happy to just hold that there and you're repaying it by doing the favor here. So anyway, um, I was reading your new book, Success Frames, which has been out for like 3 months, 2 months. And I found you talking about my book, This Is Hard, which was a complete surprise to me because I'd been reading in Success Frames and I'd been thinking about finding words in hard times and thinking that it's less about getting a script exactly right and more about ways to think, more about ways to be present with people and to be responding in the situation within a framework. So I'm thinking that based on your writing and learning from that, and then realizing, oh, he just talked about me. So as you're thinking about frameworks, what's a framework?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the idea that the less specific it is, I want to talk about frameworks and talk about frameworks sometimes in contrast to a very specific formula that then we have to follow. Uh, Formulas for me are hard to follow. Inevitably, I'm going to break something on the path of trying to follow it exactly. I'm going to question it. It's not going to work right. A framework is something that I feel there are very core elements that I can identify that support me to show up in a certain way or to approach a challenge in a certain way. When I look at just the phrase success frames, I'm thinking about looking back at how I managed to accomplish something. I don't care how big it is or small it is, but when I faced a challenge, something like, you know, getting my first job, getting my second job, completing college, like there's lots of examples of success that I can look back on. And I can find in those some core elements that generally work for me in most of those challenging situations that I can then use as a support to look at a new problem, take on a new challenge. So a framework for me is, much like a framework in a house, it supports and holds everything up. And then the design, the flow, where we set the window frame, to look out on the world, all of that can be adjusted, but it's all the supports, the framework is holding all of that up. And so that's how I see frames every day is to think about what do I need? What can I use that supports me? How do I usually do this? And when I can remember that, when I can anchor myself in that or like use those as supports, then I can approach that challenge. And if I need to make some adjustments or figure out something new about it, then I will. But the framework is there to hold me up.
Um, so two thoughts coming out of that. One of them is the way you're talking about it is a very um, individuated way. So You're not, and that may be the difference between formulas and frameworks is lots of times formulas are here, take this formula. Um, but you're saying more, I think, take the idea of a framework and build your own framework. Is that
Yes, and
okay?
in the case of, your book, for example, the way in which you set things up for others feels more, in the way that in which you talk about things like, or acknowledging first and foremost, this is hard. And even the three ways in which you do that frames things up for me a little bit to say, hard looks different, might look different for me. So this is where the individualization comes from. But you've just said sort of something that's just very true. In times of grief, this is hard. This is hard. This is hard. Um, and I can anchor myself to that element, that piece of the framework. That's going to hold me up. And now I can figure out, well, now that I know that it's hard, how do I deal with hard things? What have I done in the past? But you're helping me by just sort of establishing these pieces of this framework when we're looking at grief. Um, that's that's the way that you're not being prescriptive.
Hmm.
And again, I think one of the things that I mentioned, I know one of the things that I mentioned in the book is even your choice of a subtitle, what I say when things are hard.
Hmm.
Um, when I first read it, in my head, I just filled in the blank. It's like what to say when things are hard. That's prescriptive. But by saying, this is what I say, you're saying, this is what I find helpful. This is how I think about these things. Maybe this will be helpful for you. Maybe it won't, but you're not being prescriptive. And because of that, it allows me to come in and make it my own. And I always need to kind of be able to have that freedom to make it my own. But I appreciate the framework that you lay out.
And that was when I read that, it was like, oh, that is what I did. Because I think that was an on purpose thing, the naming of it. And I really hesitated to use the word die in the subtitle of a book because it's like, no, I don't want to make it harder. And yet, that actually is what happens. These are the things that I say when somebody's loved one dies, period. Um, and it's not going to make anybody feel worse to acknowledge that this is a death. It's actually going to help say this is this kind of a situation. And when you were talking earlier, I thought part of what a framework does as well, um, part of what underlies a framework is to say, what kind of situation is this? Now, what is it that I do in this kind of a situation?
Yeah.
And so by saying this counts as hard. I think lots of times what happens is people um, in situations of a death or other kinds of traumatic situations, people will people will hesitate and we'll do that comparison thing of, yeah, but somebody else has it worse. Because that's what we were always taught, right? Is,
Right.
well, somebody else always has it worse. So you should feel better. It's like, well, no, actually, this counts as a hard situation.
Yeah.
Other people are looking at this and saying, oh, we are the worse off for them. Um, but it's not even a comparison thing. It's like, this is a hard thing. So what is it that we do in hard things?
Hmm.
Rather than deflect them or do comparison thing. Um,
And yes, and I mean, Amy and I were actually recently talking about your book, and just in that sort of contrast between the framework approach or the invitational, like, let me tell you this is hard, and let me share some of these things that might be helpful. Your book continues to be the one that she keeps picking up, and the books that tend to be more prescriptive, things that say you should be here, you're probably here, like this much is it feels like, well, what, but so if I'm not,
Mm,
something's wrong. And now I'm lost in the what's wrong with me that I'm not at that place. Um, so again, with the framework versus a prescriptive or formulaic approach, there's permission that's given to make it my own, to experiencing it, and perhaps to use some of these frames to support me to get through and navigate that as I'm going through it, and keep going back to them. That's the other part. The individualization of it is, I know these things work for me and have worked for me. Let me try them. If they don't work that next time, that's fine too. But why not try the thing that has worked and see if it might work again in a new way? Uh, Situation's going to change. It's a little different, but if I'm building a house, like there's certain principles I'm going to follow for how to frame that up. What it might look a little different. It's built on up on a hill this time, so I got to take into account different things. But the core elements, I know these things work. And then what do we want? How do we want to adapt it to this different place, this different situation?
mm. In your book, you talked about one of the ideas from This Is Hard, which is remember the best time, not the last time. Can you talk about why that's a helpful idea, a helpful way of thinking?
We're going to naturally be caught up in trying to remember everything and be flooded with memories, right? And so that's naturally going on, I think, in times of loss, where we're just grasping at everything to make meaning of it, to make sense of it. And what I felt like that phrase did is shift me to, even though it's still going to be hard, to not think about the what wasn't said, what because like in a marriage, for example, there's always these little, maybe I was a little short with my partner the other day, and as I was leaving the house, and so that would be, would feel horrible to sort of sit in that space of, oh, that's the last thing I said. But if I it helps me to sort of kind of zoom out a little bit and take in the entirety of that relationship and all the wonderful things that happened, and knowing that we always repaired anything. Anytime we were short with each other, we always found a way back to you know
Mm.
repairing, and we knew we loved each other, and we always said wonderful things too. And so it was that shift for me is what that did. And it wasn't, in some ways, it might sound kind of prescriptive, but when I read it, I hear, what if you remembered the best time instead of the last time? That's what I
Well,
loved.
and it's, um, hmm, I can't say it's funny, because that's the wrong word. It's intriguing to me, or it's familiar to me. How often I'll be in a room following a death, or just before a death, talking to loved ones at the hospital, and family members will be talking about the last time they saw them. Like, I wish I would have done this morning before they left the house because I didn't know that this was going to be happening, and if only I would have done this. If and there's this entire focusing on 10 seconds and ignoring that every time in the past they have done that thing. So it's almost this sense of, um, if I didn't kiss my loved one this time, it
Right.
negates all the rest of that. And you're right, it's an invitation. written over there somewhere is to say try this rather than to say do this. Um, I think that there's some brain science that suggests that remembering, even right away, remembering, oh, the story of our life was this relationship. The story of our life was it had been rough, but we had this turn. And so think about those turns because those are just as true as what happened this morning. Um, and um, and by focusing on the thing that happened this morning, which may have been an aberration, right, rather than the norm,
Mhm.
um, um, we're completely missing a way of thinking, um, and we run the risk of locking ourselves into a long time of regretting, of trying to fix this thing that can't be fixed, right?
Right.
So um, a couple of researchers that talk about rumination, the idea of taking something particularly on the loss side and just replaying it and replaying it and replaying it. Um, and so thinking about a good time or thinking about the good times or thinking about um, is it's going to reframe how we think about all of the reminders of that person's life too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just thought about that. Um, because because when we live in the same place as the person that we lost, so we've got a geography of affection or we've got a geography of experience. Either, and it's not really an either or, but either we can see all of those things and they remind us of how we screwed up, or we can see all those familiar things and it reminds us of the delightful times we had with that person. Um,
I
and
I love that. Yeah. And here's another weird well, twist to that, I think too. That you if the frames that are holding things up are the good times, right? If you can remember there and you use that as sort of everything that holds up the larger picture of this relationship, which, let's just assume it was a good one and that this moment
yeah.
was the anomaly. That when you remember the difficult times or the things that annoyed you or whatever, the little things that, they did, like it's the context is different. The rumination stops and you can almost laugh them off. Or it doesn't just paint the rosy picture that it was all the best time. It's that was the whole that's what on the whole this relationship was. And so by starting with happiness, or in the vernacular of the book, success, by anchoring yourself in success, you start with this place of, I know how to do this, or we had a good relationship. And gosh, when they did this thing, boy, didn't that annoy me. And now I can laugh about it, or I don't have to feel bad. I'm not stuck in that place of I said the wrong thing. We always found our way back to this solid relationship. So I hadn't thought either about how this shifts me to, or lines up. I would have written more about you in the book if I had. That it's also, it's anchoring you in the success of the relationship, and or holding the elements of the framework are holding you up. It's based on a successful relationship. And then that's when it's easier to dip into, yeah, I may not have done that exactly right, but I know that I can do this. I'm capable. I've had success. This relationship in this case was a good one. And they loved me. I love them. They knew that. Um, that's what I think sometimes in that moment we are worried about is, did I say the wrong thing at the last moment? And they left feeling that
Yep.
when there's, you know,
Yeah.
there's so much more evidence to say they knew I love them.
Yeah. I think that there are um, in a hospital setting, so in a hospice setting, you often have lots of time for those kinds of conversations to navigate them. In a hospital setting, you often don't have very many of those times to to have uh, final conversations that you know are final conversations. And I'll come back to that in a second. Um, but oftentimes for the person in the bed, what matters is that we're having a conversation, not all the things that may have messed up. So this is going to the other side of, in spite of all of the dumb things that we did by leaving our shoes in the middle of the floor, those aren't the things that they're remembering. What they're
Right.
remembering is, you're here. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I love you and you love me. Um, the the talking about the knowing last conversation is that realization that um, we don't know which conversation is going to be the last conversation that we have with somebody, um, which then speaks to an overall kind of, so have conversations with the ones that you love that are the kinds of conversations that you want to remember, not as a prescriptive thing, but as an opportunity too. I mean, it's a thing to lean toward is, again, how do I build frameworks that help me lean toward being more
Yeah.
gracious to the people that I care about? Um, and that's a helpful thing to be thinking in terms of as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of the, again, you know, remember when you can, when you can remember the things that support you in having those good conversations, whatever that is, and you know you're capable of it, then yeah, it keeps it. What's going to keep it present for you? What helps you? What helps support you to have the kind of conversation you want? What helps support you to make sure you have conversations with and don't have conversations with with people you don't want to? That
Right.
might be part of it too, right? How do I, like, one of the, there could be a framework for decision making on, you get
Mm.
asked to come to a, to go to something, it seems really fun and interesting, but you make a decision to say, actually, it's fun and interesting as that sounds, I've got a value of, or there's some core element that I want to decide to no say no to that and choose to focus and spend time with my family at this point in time in my life. I don't care how interesting the opportunity is. So that idea of like stopping for a second and saying, here's this thing, but I get to choose. I don't have to immediately respond and say yes. That's that space between stimulus and response that I obsess on, and trying to figure out how to what I hoped in many ways with success frames and attention before, it was this idea of how can I help people find even a sliver of that space where they feel like they can sit and they have that locus of control to say, yep, that looks interesting, but I can choose where my attention's going to go, what my decision's going to, what decision I want to make here. I've got, even in the tiniest of milliseconds, if we have that wherewithal to go, no. And sometimes for me, it's frameworks that help me do that.
I think that as you're saying that, and as we're thinking about um, people in grief situations, I think that having the permission to say, um, I'm grieving right now. I don't have to show up at your party.
Right.
Um, as we're having this conversation, we're in the middle of the holiday season. Um, and if somebody knows that they're going to be, um, if somebody knows that when they show up at this party, they're going to be overwhelmed by people saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I bet this is hard for you." And then they go on to other stuff. It's like, no, you can say, this year, I'm not going to be attending. Period. Don't have to give a reason unless you want to make people feel miserable. And I give you
Right.
permission to make people feel miserable to say, are you coming this year? It's like, don't you know that my loved one just died? So being in the midst of your frivolity while I'm trying to recover, I'd rather not do that. That feels harsh. And I'm probably not, I probably wouldn't say that, except if somebody said that, I would give them permission to say that. To say what's most important for me right now is surviving. And so I'm going to choose to not meet up to your obligation or expectation of how I ought to be because I'm the one in the middle of it.
And those decisions are really hard. So offering up, an idea that you could possibly even say that is a
Mhm.
wonderfully supportive thing because there is that feeling of response. And this is where, like, even the most well-intentioned folks who are trying to support will say, but you should get out. You should get out more. And like, I think it's time for you to just kind of get out there in the world and not always the most helpful. It comes with a lot of expectation, and it's nice that someone is trying to be thoughtful and think of you and think of what might support you, but that's not it. You're reminding me of a way in which I've been trying to have some conversations with either with Megan, or my children in different ways, is trying to remember, and I used to do this with my brother as well, um, asking, "What dad do you need me to be right now?" Uh, and giving them the permission to kind of say, "Oh, well, actually, I just need you to listen. Do you need advice, Dad? Do you need love, Dad? Or which part of it's more me for me to say which part of Dad do I need to hold back? Because you're going to get all of them, but one or more of them might not be helpful. So just tell me which ones to keep off to the side, and I'll just show up that way." It's so that is again like you know frames up the interaction a little
Mm.
differently, and I'm not coming in trying to be helpful and failing. So this is one of the things that I've continued, and I keep expanding the people with whom I use this, is to say, which person do you need
Mm.
right now? Which dad do you need? Which spouse do you need? Which brother do you need right now? So that I can be most helpful.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Um,
Thank you.
Rob's Rob's book I just happen to have here is called Success Frames, um, which is why learning from success is the key to understanding what motivates and inspires us. Um, And thanks for listening to Finding Words in Hard Times, the podcast, where we're trying to provide stories and tools to help you be more comfortable as you help others in hard times. You can subscribe to the newsletter at thisishard.substack.com. In the show notes, I will have links and resources, including a link for Rob's book and for my book. And thanks, Rob, and thanks for those who are listening and watching for wanting to be helpful. That's a big deal. Thanks, friend.
Thank you.